With 3 games left on the schedule, TCU season is already over, and they have no one to blame but themselves. Oh yeah, it's Locked On Horned Frogs. Play my music.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Horned Frogs podcast. I'm Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, and I am the host of the only daily TCU athletic podcast on the #1 podcast network in the country. That is, of course, Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for making this your first listen of the day every day, especially after a game like this that honestly leaves a lot to be desired. I went through a couple of different openings. I was going to yawn for you because honestly, this was a snooze fest. I was thinking about something clever and witty to say, but the truth of the matter is, let's give it to you direct. Let's be completely honest. TCU lost this game and it cost them their season. And the reason they lost this game is because of mistakes by Josh Hoover, mistakes by the entire team, and then the kicking game, fumbling, interceptions. This was an overall disappointing performance. And I thought that TCU and Iowa State came out in ways I didn't expect. I knew that this would be a competitive game. I know that on Friday, I said that this was the easiest game left and that if they don't win this game, then heads need to roll. We'll be back Monday. We're going to catch up with that storyline. But today we're going to give the immediate aftermath and why everything happened. Not what needs to happen afterwards, but why this game transpired the way that it did. And it all comes down to mistakes, whether that's turnovers, whether that's missed kicks. But like I was saying, the Horned Frogs came out flat. TCU came out flat in this game, and Iowa State came out more aggressive than I thought. Neither one of these are things that I saw coming. I thought it would be a competitive game. I thought that it would be close. The final score being decided by a field goal wasn't shocking to me. I just thought TCU would be on the other side of it. And what makes this worse than anything else, than any of the other victories, or excuse me, any of the other losses, is that it happened in the Carter, right? So when you're losing at Arizona State, when you're losing at Kansas State, I can sit here and I can say this is because of their road woes. This is something that they struggle to do. I can bring up stats. I can look at what Hoover's done on the road. I can look at what Dykes' record is on the road. I can point to all of these aspects that are road game specific. But when you lose at home in the Carter with the season on the line, it's just disappointing. The way that it happened was disappointing. I'm listening because obviously I'm not there, right? So I'm listening on the broadcast, and one of the announcers says that Coach Dykes says the team knows how important this game is. I couldn't tell. Because they didn't come out like their season was on the line. Iowa State did. Iowa State came out way more aggressive going forward on 2 4th downs early in the game. I didn't expect that. They get a touchdown. They go for 2 points on their first touchdown of the game. These are set the tone moves. What did TCU do to set the tone? What did TCU do to say that this is a game that we have to win? This is a game that we're going to pull out. I'm going to be honest with you. And I don't do this often. I'm honest with you all the time. That's not the thing I don't do often. But I don't do this often. I regret the things that I said on last week's podcast on multiple fronts. I really do. And TCU made me regret what I said on last week's podcast. Because I talked about how this was the easiest game left. Actually, that's not something I regret because we're going to get into the aftermath of it. The part that I genuinely regret of everything that I said last week was the aspect of this being a perfectly timed bye week. Because under normal circumstances, I would be right. Under normal circumstances, having a bye week to refresh yourself before the toughest 4-game stretch of your season, before the 4-game stretch where you have to win out, that would be great. But in TCU's case, this is not what they do well. I think back to the Abilene Christian game. And I said, this is what a trap game looks like. It looks like playing closer than you should. And that's exactly what happened. And then Coach Dykes came in and said that he didn't feel like they had the best week of practice. Now you could point to the North Carolina victory and say, well, they were kind of full on that. You could point to that, and I will give you that. But what I'll say now is that 2 weeks, they had 2 bye weeks this season. TCU had 2 bye weeks this season, and after neither one did they look good. You come out against Abilene Christian, Coach Dykes said you don't have the best week of practice. Felt like they were a little flat. They come out the bye week this week, and I feel like they were flat. How do you come out in 3 passes into the game, you're throwing interceptions? Because that's what this comes down to. It's mistakes. It's shooting yourself in the foot. And I know that a lot of times people try to erase the mistakes that Josh Hoover makes. He's a good quarterback. He's the face of your team. Feel like he's one of the better quarterbacks. Maybe you even feel like outside noise is way too negative around Josh Hoover. So it's on you to put on the cape. It's on you to put on that emblem on your chest and defend him. But sometimes we have to call a spade a spade. And sometimes we have to say, these are mistakes and these were costly. That first interception that he threw, that led to points. The second interception didn't. I'm not trying to say that the game's any different, or I'm not trying to say that the game is won if he doesn't turn over the ball, but it certainly didn't help the cause. That's without a doubt. Because I think when I point to the interceptions of Josh Hoover, I did debate in high school, so my mind just naturally goes to what they're going to say back to me. Well, they had a chance to win. They had the lead after those interceptions. It wasn't about, what about Trent Battle's fumble? We're going to get to that. But when I talk about setting the tone, when I talk about what comes out in your initial statement, Iowa State said, we're going to score a touchdown and go for 2. Did they get it? No, but that tells me what type of mindset that they're in. With my starting quarterback, when the face of my team throws an interception less than 5 attempts into the game, it tells me what type of game that this is going to be. And I was right. That's the game it was. Pressure was involved. Yes, 100%. Pressure was involved. The first time I think it was a little more excusable. It looked like when the pressure gets around the throwing arm, I excuse the quarterback often. So I'm not going to make an exception here. But that second one, I didn't think the pressure was enough. That was a bad interception. It just was. And I thought we saw multiple times early in the game where Hoover wasn't on point. But then you get to the McCashlin missed field goal. And when you lose by 3 points, that's the thing that looms the largest. Second largest only to Trent Battle's fumble late in the game. But you lose by 3 points. That's 3 points you could have had. 3 points you could have had. And now you're at least going into a tied ball game. At least you're going into overtime. Maybe you play it differently. This was an ugly, ugly, ugly loss because it was so disappointing. At no point did this feel enjoyable. I would probably say this was the least enjoyable TCU game that I've seen this year. You could argue the Kansas State game 100%, but I think that this was from start to finish. At no point did it feel like you want to watch it. If you were just a football fan, tell me, but if you were just a football fan, at what point would you have turned that game off? At what point would you have flipped the channel? At what point would you have just kept that in the multi-view? Because that's not a matchup, in my opinion, that had anybody excited. I watch it because that's TCU. But they didn't do anything exciting. I don't think that the defense was terrible. They shored up late. I thought that TCU was gaining some momentum on offense. But we all know the turning point of this game, easy, simple to see. It was the punt return. That was the costly thing. That was it. When you have a punt return touchdown against you, it's very difficult to bounce back. When that's the thing that gives you the lead, and then they get the 2-point conversion, and now you need a field goal just to tie, it began to feel rough. But then what does TCU do? They give us a little bit of hope. What does TCU do? They start driving down the field. What does TCU do? They have those old demons come right back from the beginning of the game. Josh Hoover has an interception early. He has a second interception. And then at the end of the game, when you want it all to come together, Trent Battle fumbles. You finally start running the football. You finally get some motion on the offensive line. You finally get some separation. There's lanes. There's tough runs. Matter of fact, the Trent Battle run was tough. They had a defender who was grabbing at the back of his jersey, and then you fumble. And at that moment, I knew, you knew, we all knew. Game over. Game over. So recently, the Michael Jackson biopic, that trailer dropped. And if TCU wants to see why their game and their season ended the way that it did, got to start with the man in the mirror. But we're going to go into some positive, right? We're going to start good. We're going to speak positively because Positivity is a choice. I will choose it because I don't know when I'm going to be choosing it moving forward as we continue with Locked On Horned Frogs. Today's episode is brought to you by DoorDash. And sheesh, we're talking about rising to the occasion. I don't know what we're going to do, but it's time to crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered the most. So let's break it down. For the Frogs, I would say that Jordan Dwyer and Bud Clark, specifically Clark, are two players who rose to the occasion. They had big-time moments throughout the game, and they're probably two guys who you're not putting this loss on for sure. I think that's the easy one. Hey, we're not putting this on Bud. We're not putting this on Dwyer. And in a game like this where you didn't have many huge highlights, that's probably the best that you're going to get. It's probably the best you're going to get. The only thing better than that is maybe you actually use your DoorDash streaks. But it's not over. It's not over. You still got a couple of games. And just like Clark and just like Dwyer delivered for the Frogs, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you can save every Saturday that you order. Stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive and fuel your game day. Only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 19th. Today's episode is also brought to you by Supply House. And when the opening whistle blows on a new repair, and maybe be repairing a coaching staff from the top to the bottom, I don't know. I'm just saying maybe we're going to be doing a lot of HVAC, electrical, and plumbing, and also just repair work out in Fort Worth. But anyway, there's real-time inventory and honest lead-in times to keep you from punting on projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. So maybe you need parts fast for a project. Supply House has it. Next day delivery. Talk about a game changer. Their part finder tools and 3D schematics can save you hours. So it's up to you to join the free Trade Master program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use the promo code SHCollege5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On Horned Frogs, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. And remember, when the mic cuts off, does not mean that the journey is over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter. Ask out the exclusives. We're going to have some fun. Positivity is a choice, and I am here to choose it. I'm here to have fun. Woo! And what we're going to do with this is we're going to look at some players of the game. We're going to look at the players of the game because I know that that's not necessarily the tone, but we've already addressed what went wrong. Yes, Josh Hoover has one more year. Apollo Miller, the name. Yeah, Apollo Miller. Josh Hoover has one more year, and he needs it. All right, he needs it straight up. I don't think that this season is ending the way that he wanted it to end. I don't think it's ending the way that many TCU fans thought it would end after that first year. We're going to get to some comments, so keep dropping them in here, and I'll go in and I'll read them, and some I may just make into next week's programming. But anyway, let's get into our player of the game. We're going to have fun. We're going to have a good time. Let's play a little bit of our... Where's it at? There we go.
This is the Locked On Player of the Game.
We got two players of the game. Two players of the game, and we're going to start off with our guy, Bud Clark, who had 2 interceptions, and these were the 2 standout moments in the game to me. They were, and they both featured big-time plays by the defensive backs. One was Glover, and one was Clark. So on that first interception, man, Clark had sticky coverage. That was a real good coverage. If I remember correctly, it was a slot fade attempt. They tried to run a slot fade on Clark, and he had great coverage. He was with him step by step, always in phase. He had his head, he turned his head around, and the ball was low. I thought it was a poor decision because Clark was there the whole way. Maybe it was third down, so Rocco Beck decided that he just was like, we're going to throw it up. Screw it, right? It's third down. I don't know if I agree with that decision, but maybe that was the rationale in it. But it was a low ball. I thought it made it a more difficult catch for both the receiver and the defensive back, but Clark reached down and snagged it. The second time, Vernon Glover hit the ball and knocked it up in the air, and you saw a lot of effort out of Bud Clark. So that was the difference. One was an effort play. One was just real good technique from start to finish. That's the defensive player of the game. And then Jordan Dwyer, I thought had a really nice game today. 11 catches, 108 yards, 1 touchdown. And it was a really good touchdown. I don't know what the ref was looking at. I don't know how that had to go to review. Jordan Dwyer is literally in the end zone pointing at the piece of grass that comes up from his foot. I don't know what they saw, but that to me, Dwyer and Clark are the two highlights from this game. At the end of the day, it wasn't a good matchup, but those are two highlights of the day. What made this difficult is that the announcer saying, look at the revitalization of Rocco Becht. Rocco Becht hasn't played good in a month. Rocco Becht has not played well in a month. The fans from Iowa State were begging to get him benched. And I don't think he played phenomenally in this game, though that play call on fourth and 1, that boot, you got to give it up. That was all Iowa State. But in general, I said it in the beginning and I'll say it again. TCU has no one to blame but themselves for the fact that they lost this game. They have no one but themselves to blame for the fact that their season is over despite having 3 games left on the year. That's the only person that they could point to. Hoover interceptions, battle fumble, McCashlin missed field goal from super close. These are mistakes that, yes, pressure had a part to do with it. But at what point are we going to say, oh, no pressure. Manage the pressure. I don't think that this team manages physical or figurative pressure. I don't. When the pressure is right in Hoover's face, I don't think he handles it that well. When the pressure is on the offense to make a play late, I don't think they do it well. I really don't. Like, what are we pointing to? What are we pointing to? Tell me the game, because you're all here. Tell me the game that TCU's offense made the big time play in the last 10 minutes. Off the top of my head, I can't think of none. I'll leave room for one. Maybe they did it against SMU. Probably the SMU game. Probably that. But I feel like they've had a lot of opportunities to the point to where one successful conversion, that's like going 1 of 7 on third down and saying, well, we did get 1 third down conversion. Not enough. It's not enough. Well, let's read in some of these things. This is a really interesting premise by, I'm going to say Lamarian21. Says the coach should be able to inspire his teammates and have them fired up to give it their all. Yes and no, in my opinion. Yes, I do think the coach has to be able to get these guys prepared. But I don't think that inspiration should be needed from the coach. If Sonny Dykes needs to hype up his players for this Iowa State game, he's got the wrong players. That's how I feel. I think back to, I believe it was DeMarcus Lawrence, and this just stuck with me when I was younger. Growing up in the DFW, listening to talk radio, DeMarcus Lawrence, it was one game. I think it was probably against the Eagles. You know, Cowboy fans remember when the Cowboys and Eagles were going back and forth every year. It felt like for divisional supremacy. But it was a game that had major ramifications for the Cowboys. And DeMarcus Lawrence said the coach didn't have him fired up. And I thought to myself, when games are this important, why does the coach need to get you fired up? And that's how I feel about this Iowa State game. So, yes, I do think the coach needs to inject some fire. I think he needs to have them prepared. I think that's more important. But Iowa State, you lose this game, your season's over. I don't think any more inspiration needs to go with it. Great point. Coach has nothing to do with the quarterback airmailing passes. I think sometimes we need to point out some things here. Why have there not been any mentions here about Hoover's injury? Because Coach Dykes wants to tell us that he's not injured. So if you want to tell us that the quarterback isn't injured, he doesn't have, there's nothing wrong with him. Hey, look, these are overblown. He didn't have no surgery. If you want to continue to tell me that the quarterback's not injured and that nothing is wrong with him health-wise, then I'm going to treat him that way. Right? Like that's how I feel. So I feel like because they keep downplaying the injury, I'm going to accept that and move accordingly. Does he seem different? Kind of, but I've also seen these mistakes earlier in the season when injuries weren't a question. So I'm not going to say that he seems worse to me than he was about a month and a half ago. So I'll give you that. But I don't know if I can put it all on injury. I'll say that. But that is a great point. So I hope I addressed that well. Let's see. Any other comments before we get out of here? I do feel like the defense is all right. I never feel like the defense, maybe it's the lower expectations for the defense, but I just don't feel like the defense is the problem. I rarely feel annoyed with the defense. I was early, and then I felt like they settled in. So even though they did get ran on, I didn't think they did a great job. It wasn't like a steel curtain defense today at all. But it just felt like they did enough. They did enough today. And it feels like when the defense doesn't have a great game, they still tend to do enough. That's what I think the lack of complaining is. A lot of coaching. Let me say this, and then actually I'm gonna look one last time and we're gonna close it out. 100%. 100%. Comes out flat, not prepared. I 1,000% agree with that. I 1,000% agree that the team is not prepared, and that is a Sonny Dykes problem. And speaking of Sonny Dykes, I hear everybody coaching. If I did Command F and I looked at the most common word, coach would be the one that is pointed out. So for everybody who has an issue with coaching, let me say this. Monday, we're going to do a live stream. Going to be late. It's going to be late on Monday. It's all about coaching. And you're going to want to watch because I'm calling for jobs. Whose job? I don't know. Might be multiple jobs. Might be wholesale changes. But Monday night, we're calling for jobs because I told you major changes are needed if TCU loses this game. I'm standing on that. I talk about regretting certain things, want to take back certain things. I'm not taking that back. I stand on it. TCU needs to make major changes after this Iowa State game. It won't happen this week. It probably won't happen for the rest of the season, but it needs to happen when the offseason hits. I just don't see you being able to come back with this same nucleus and saying, let's run it back. Feels like insanity. In the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, that's just a taste of what we're getting on Monday. Take care. Stay blessed. Peace.